Bam, and just like that, fam, now you're the master of the blockchain. You're connected to the Glassnode API and just all the data. You got all of the data. Finance family, it's the other brother Adam, Getbags, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Glassnode API, the full tutorial in Python. We're going to do this in 3 easy steps. First, we're going to sign up, get our API key. Then we're going to connect to the API, start exploring the endpoints, some of the parameters we can use for customization on your requests, and then last we're going to just pull down all that data. So go ahead, pop open your trusty Google here, and then go ahead and Google search Glassnode API docs. And then you can go ahead and click in here to this first link, introduction, but then go ahead, do yourself a favor, open up your Python environment, and then go head over to my GitHub, github.com/AdamGetbags, and that's going to be in the description for you there. Click into my repos here, and then at the top we have our Glassnode data, and if you click in there, I'm going to put the script from the video in there so you can easily access this. So if you go ahead and pop open to your Python script, first thing we're doing here is importing our modules. These plotly ones here are just for some graphs, and then what I'm doing here is I'm importing my API key from a separate file so y'all can't get your dirty hands on it. But what you can do is just go ahead and with your dirty hands put your API key in right here, and then any of the parameters here where you see Glassnode API key, you can just replace that with your API key. So no problem there. But let's figure out how we're going to get our API key. So if you pop over to that first page, here we have API key. Go ahead, click in there. It's going to give you instructions how to do that there. You can just head over to the Glassnode Studio, and then when that opens up, you have this sign up button. So go ahead, sign up or log in if you already have an account. Awesome. So once you signed in, you can go ahead and click up on this header here, and then click API, and then that's going to bring up your API key. Then you could just go ahead and copy this over and then paste it into your Python script, and you just want to paste it right here. All right, so now that we've got our API key locked in, we can start making requests. So as you see, we've imported the request library here, and then we're going to start making requests. We're going to make a GET request here, and then here's the endpoint. And I'll show you how to find these endpoints in the documentation. So if you come over to the documentation and you go to this sidebar here, if you click under list of metrics, this is going to give you a list of the available endpoints. So here's our URL. You can just go ahead and copy that, and then you can bring it over to your Python script. So you would just paste that in right here, and then this would be the URL that we're using in our GET request. And then the parameter that we want to pass is our API key. So if you have your API key, you would just paste that right there and you'd be good to go. So here we have this second line of code here. We're just getting our response.text, and then we're reading this JSON into a data frame here. So as you can see, we've got a nice neat data frame here, and here's all the URL paths for all of our endpoints. And there's additional columns here that we're going to take a look at right now. This next line of code here just shows us the columns that are in this data frame, and as we can see here, there's 6 different columns, and they each contain a bunch of different information. So probably most importantly, we have our URLs here under path, and then we're just going to take a quick look in there. All right, and as you can see, just a ton of different URLs and endpoints for us to hit. And if you want to look at a specific endpoint, you just kind of add a 0 to the end there, and then that brings us the first row of the column path, and then we can see our URL right here. This next line of code here, what it does is it shows you what tier a specific endpoint is on. So the Glassnode Studio, they have a specific plans, and if you don't have the paid plan, then you can't access above tier 2. So it's super helpful if you want to look up metrics that you can access at the free level or at the tier 2 level, etc., etc. Then if you go over here to their studio, you just type T1, and then that's going to bring you all of your T1 endpoints. And then also T2, you can check that out, and then T3, you can also check that out. Great, so we can see that the first row, this path here is a tier 3, so of course not gonna be able to access that. So if you wanted to see all of the tier 1 endpoints, you could just use this code right here, and that's gonna print out all of your endpoints there. Here we have some code. Let's say you wanted to see tier 2 and lower. Now you could see all of tier 1 and all of tier 2. Okay, this next line of code is going to be really helpful for you. It's going to allow you to find the index and the row number of the endpoint by using the path. So here I have the actual endpoint as it would appear in our data here. And I know this because I was searching through the Glassnode docs. Here we have our endpoint right here. Copy that. and you can paste it inside of here. But now we're going to be able to find our index so that we can look at the other data that's inside of our endpoint data, all in one place instead of having to leaf through the docs or go through the studio. So let's go ahead and check that out. So I went ahead and ran that, and then that gives us back our row here. It gives the entire row, but if we wanted to find, the index, we could just put .index at the end of endpoint row, and that would give us our number here. And then we can check out, whatever data that we need for this specific endpoint. And you'll see how that comes in handy right here. So in our next line of code, we're going to take a look at all the supported assets in a specific endpoint from our data frame. So what we're doing here is we're using the row number. So this is that number 349. And then we're actually looking at the values inside of the asset column of our endpoint data frame. So we're looking at all of our endpoint data. We're going to the asset column, and then we're going to the specific row. Because if I want to look at, hey, what assets can I use for this specific endpoint, then that's going to all pop up right here. And as you'll see, it's probably very similar to all of these assets that we see in the documentation. But again, you can look at also the different granularity of data that's available to you. It looks like 1 hour and 24 hours. And that's not in the documentation. So that's why this code is going to be important. Okay, so now that we've got situated, we're comfortable with kind of navigating through the endpoint data. Now we can go ahead and start hitting some specific endpoints. But let's take a quick look at the documentation, see what kind of customizations available to us. So the first request we're going to make is for this price USD, open, high, low, close. And then if we pull that up in the documentation, it's going to show us, okay, we need to put an asset in, but then we can also specify a date range, and we can also specify a candle width. So it's like how thick are your bars. So you can get 1 hour bars, you can get 24-hour bars, right? And then of course you can return JSON or CSV data. So I have our first request here. We're going to go ahead and get some Bitcoin data, and we're going to pass in our API key. And then our interval here is going to be 24 hours. So these are going to be daily bars. And then I've also included a request right down here where you can get some 1 hour bars if you wanted to. So let's go ahead and just quickly make the request, and then we'll walk through the rest of the code. Next up, what we have right here is we're just going to read this data in here, and it's going to get this data into a data frame for us. But as we can see, this column O looks like it's dictionaries here. So then what we're going to do in these next 2 lines of code here, we're just going to quickly clean up this data frame. We're going to rename our column T to be date, and then our column O is going to be our candlestick data. But as we know, that's dictionaries. So as you can see here, a little bit neater. And then what we also did was just set our index to date. It's making everything a little bit neater. And now we only have 1 column, which is our candle data. And then what we want to do next is turn our candle dictionaries into individual series. So what this is going to look like is now our candles dictionaries are going to be exploded into their individual columns. So we have close, high, low, open. And then all we're going to do in this next line of code is we're just going to rename our columns. Now this looks very familiar to anybody who works with candlestick data. And then what we're going to do here is we're just going to quickly go and generate a plotly figure. Oh, looks nice. We got our candlestick data with a nice neat little slider here. Damn, I think I'm shaping up to be like the king of the blockchain or something. All right, up next we're going to make a request to get the total number of addresses that hold a specific crypto. So we're going to use Bitcoin, and then we're going to just pass in our API key. But you can find this in the documentation here. So if you just search total addresses, you'll find it, and then you can just see the chart. And this is basically the data we're going to get back here. And then I've also made another request here if you want to look up Ethereum, but then you can use the same technique of finding out which assets are available by a specific endpoint that I showed earlier in the video. You can get essentially the number of addresses that hold any of the assets on that list. So we're going to execute suspiciously similar looking code here. We're just going to read the text in, we're going to convert these dates, and then we're going to rename our column time to date, and then the value to number of addresses. We're going to reset the index to date, and then we're just going to plot this data out. So if we just take a quick look at the data here, we can see we have our date there, and then our number of addresses, and then we can see our chart right here. And it looks like it's going up only, so that's not financial advice. All right, moving right along, we're just gonna make a request to get our spent output profit ratio here. Very simple, you can find that in the documentation. You just look up SOPR. It's gonna be basically the same deal. We're just hitting that endpoint, passing our currency in, our API key, and again, the code is very similar here, at least for these last couple requests. The data looks a little bit different, but we could just take a quick look here. We got our date here, and then we've got our ratio here. But if you look at the chart, it's got a little bit different characteristic to it. All right, up next, we've got the supply last active over a year ago. So this is what percentage of the supply has been basically not moved in the last year. And as you can see, that our yellow line here is the data we're going to be grabbing. So we pop over here, we can go ahead, put our URL in, and then put our currency and our API key. We're going to change the column names again, and all the code looks very similar there because we're basically getting the same amount of data, and we see our long-term supply. So you can see the graph there, very pretty, and then we have our data right here. Okay, up next we have our pi cycle top indicator. We can see our URL right here, and then also a brief description. Our required parameters here is just a cryptocurrency, and then we can see our nice chart here from the studio. So then let's flip over to our Python script and just take a look at it here. So I'm going to execute these two lines here, and then just take a look at our data that we get back. So again, it's the unformatted date. We have a column of dictionaries, so we're going to need to just convert that up. So first thing we're going to do here is just change up our column names and set our index to date, and then we're still just going to need to explode out those dictionaries. So this line of code here, it just turns each of those dictionaries into a series. So you can see here we have each of our individual series. So it looks like this larger value is going to correspond to that purple line, and then this is going to be our teal line. And then if we just want to take a look at our plot here, you can just go ahead and run that, and then we've got our chart here, which looks mad different because it's not on a log scale. But if you want to just convert that, you can do that. You know, this is why they pay you the big bucks. Bam, and just like that, fam, now you're the master of the blockchain. You're connected to the Glassnode API and just all the data. You got all the data. All right, so good work out there. If you like the content, let me know what you think in the comments. You can always support me by buying me a coffee. The link's gonna be in the description. You have my blessings, fam. Some crazy stuff is going on in the markets right now. So get that information, get that data, give yourself an edge, and be safe out there. Dodge those red candles, fam. You have my blessing. Let's go get these bags.